I think we will just start the webinar. Welcome to everybody. So today, thank you all for joining us as we do our deep dive webinar on the exposure draft revisions to the code on using the work of an external expert, New Zealand. My name's Karen Tipper. I'm a technical director in the assurance team, and I am joined by my colleague, Bruce McNiven, who will be running the slides and the polls in the background for me. So thank you very much for doing that, Bruce. So on the agenda today in this webinar, I'm going to talk about what we're currently consulting on, the key principles within the proposals in the exposure draft for the using of the work of an external expert. And I'm also going to talk through some opportunities that we have to engage as we seek to hear your feedback on these new proposals. So firstly, we have issued our latest consultation, which is International Alignment, Sustainability Assurance, Ethics and Independence, and Using the Work of an External Expert. And Bruce has put the link to this consultation into the chat for you. So this consultation closes on the 10th of October, so a few weeks to go, and this is the third of our deep dive sessions to talk about the consultation. So why are we consulting? The international boards, so the IAASB, the International Audit and Assurance Standards Board, and the IESPA, the International Ethics and Standards Board for Accountants, have recently released 3 new international standards. The first of these is a standard for engagement performance. This is the standard for general requirements for sustainability assurance engagements. And this is the one that some of you may have joined for a webinar a couple of weeks ago on this one. And the second one is the ethics and independence standard. This has been issued by the International Ethics Board, and this is for sustainability assurance practitioners. So this is the IESA. And the final one, which I'm talking about today, is using the work of an external expert. The proposed application date for all of these standards is for periods starting on or after the 15th of December 2026. So now we'll move on to the scope and how these standards may be used. So all 3 of these standards, we are proposing that they be used as an option for mandatory greenhouse gas emissions assurance, and for voluntary assurance on any other information in the climate statements or on other reported sustainability information. The exposure draft that I will be talking about today, revisions to the code on using the work of an external expert, this one is mandatory for financial statement audits and reviews, as well as being included for sustainability assurance too. So I just want to get a sense really of who's in the room with us today. And I have 2 quick poll questions for you. The first is, do you currently perform financial statement audits or sustainability assurance engagements? Yes or no? And do you use Professional and Ethical Standard 1? So that's the New Zealand version of the IESPA code. And I'll give you a few minutes to answer those questions. So thank you everyone for joining us. I see we have a mixture of people in the room with us today, and I hope you all find useful information from this webinar. So yes, thank you for joining us. So next I'm going to move on to covering some of the key considerations within the exposure draft revisions to the code on using the work of an external expert. So as I said, I will be just covering some of the key things, not everything that is in those revisions. So firstly, why were these revisions proposed by the International Board? Firstly, they were in response to recent projects. So using the work of an external expert is not a new thing, but the International Board had heard many questions about how the ethical and independence expectations could be assessed of external experts and what those ethical and independence expectations were. They also felt that there were heightened stakeholder expectations, and this is particularly given the use of external experts in new fields such as sustainability assurance, but also in for financial statement assurance as experts are being used. So they decided to develop a global baseline for ethics considerations for the use of external experts. In the next slide, I am just showing you where these considerations are in the extant code, in the IASBA's Code of Ethics. So these are ethical considerations in Part 3 and Part 2 of the IASBA's Code of Ethics, and these will be revisioned to those two parts. Within the IESA, so within the sustainability assurance proposals, then they are in the ethics, the applying the conceptual framework to ethics provisions, using the work of an external expert is included within those. And this is just to show where you will find these revisions. So using the work of an external expert is something that is also considered within the international audit standards. And I wanted to talk about the interoperability between these proposals by the IASBA and the requirements that are within the auditing and assurance standards. So the auditing and assurance standards, they are used. So the purpose of the auditing and assurance standard is to address whether the expert's work is adequate for the practitioner's purposes. So the purpose of those is for an assurance practitioner to obtain appropriate evidence, sufficient and appropriate evidence from the external expert. These proposals within the IASBA standards are designed to address ethical threats. So the threats that might the use of this work might create. The scope of these two standards are different. So for the IAASB standards, the auditing and assurance standards, these cover audits and other assurance engagements, and the ethical standards cover audits and other assurance engagements and non-assurance services. So they're slightly wider. So then who is an external expert? And there are a few considerations as to whether the provisions in the standard apply and who an external expert actually is. So firstly, is the expert performing audit procedures? If they are, and they do not need to be a member of your firm to perform these procedures, then they are a member of the engagement team, and independence is required in the same way as other engagement team members, in line with the requirements in the independent standards in the code and in PES1. If the expert is providing consultation pursuant to quality management standards, so pursuant to some of the international standards on auditing, then they will be an audit team member. And again, independence will be required in accordance with the international independence standards within the extant code. If they are not, then they will be an external expert, and this will be in scope for this for this exposure draft. So within this exposure draft, there are a number of new key definitions. So firstly is a new definition for expert, being an individual possessing expertise that is outside the assurance practitioner or sustainability assurance practitioner's competence. Then we have a new definition for expertise. So these are skills and knowledge and experience in a particular field, and a definition for an external expert, which is an expert engaged by the assurance practitioner or the assurance practitioner's firm. What is not in scope in these revisions is any work that is being carried out by a management expert, any work carried out by subcontractors that are being directed and reviewed by the practitioner, or any other information provided by external sources that can be used for general use, or any close business relationships with an external expert. The proposals within the exposure draft require an assurance practitioner to evaluate and then conclude on whether the expert that they're proposing to use has the necessary competence, capability, and objectivity for their purpose. The framework, the competence, capability, and objectivity framework is outlined in these proposals. So there are a number of factors that are relevant to evaluating competence and capability. So for competence, the assurance practitioner may consider whether the external expert that they are proposing to use has the necessary credentials that they need, whether they have the relevant education or training or experience, potentially whether they belong to a professional body or are subject to oversight by a regulatory body, whether they work as subject to legal or regulatory requirements. For capability, the assurance practitioner is required to assess whether the expert has the resources required to be able to complete the work, whether they have sufficient time to complete the work. Then the proposals also talk about factors that are relevant in identifying and evaluating threats to objectivity. So whether there are any perceived or actual conflicts of interest that have been identified in relation to using the external expert. It also covers examples of safeguards that may be used to address threats to the expert's objectivity, whether someone else could come and review the work, for example. There is guidance to where information on the expert's competence, capability, and objectivity might be obtained, and there are examples of where you might find this information. There is also emphasis on professional judgment. So the assurance practitioner is required to exercise their professional judgment in making this evaluation, and to also apply the reasonable and informed third party test. What would a reasonable and informed third party think about this and the objectivity? There are also proposals that discuss the pressure to breach the code's fundamental principles. And if you experience this pressure by being unable to conclude about whether the expert has the necessary competence, capability, and objectivity, what you should do in this case. By concluding, the practitioner cannot use the work of an external expert if they cannot determine that the expert has the necessary competence, capability, or objectivity, or they cannot use it if they have determined that they do not have it for their purpose. So the period that is covered for the objectivity, this is the period covered by the work that is being done. So either the audit, potentially the review or other assurance report, through to the issuance of that report. So the external expert is required to be objective for the entire period through to the issuance of the assurance report at the end of the period. There are also proposals to obtain information in writing from the external expert. So the assurance practitioner is required under these new proposals to agree the engagement terms with the external expert and to request certain information from the external expert and to obtain that information in writing. There are different requirements, proportionate requirements for public interest entities, as well as requirements for all other entities. And there are specific requirements that require disclosure of interests and relationships and circumstances in writing from the external expert. These requirements are for the same information to be requested for all team members used by the expert within their team. So just another poll question. Do you agree with the proposed revisions to the code for using the work of external expert as explained? And just wait a couple more seconds. Great, thank you. And we have a mixed result, but yes, so 75% agree and 25% do not. So thank you for your feedback. And now I will just move on to some of the events and opportunities that we have to engage as we go through this consultation. So firstly, our next event is a virtual panel event, and we are very lucky to be joined on this panel event by some really expert panelists. We have a member of the IAASB and a member of the IASBA who are joining us to go through these proposals, as well as a member of our assurance board who will bring their expertise and their practitioners' views on these proposals. We also have the deep dives that we have recorded in the past couple of weeks, and those are available on our website if you want to access them to find more information about the other two standards that I talked about at the beginning of the webinar, and that is the exposure draft on sustainability assurance and the exposure draft for the ethics and independence for sustainability assurance practitioners. And you may have been maybe aware of another consultation that is currently going on at the moment. This is a consultation on proposed 2025 amendments to the Climate and Assurance Standard. And this is a proposal to extend some adoption provisions contained within these standards. This consultation closes on the 24th of September 2025, and information on this is included on our website. So thank you very, very much for joining me today. And please do let me know if there are any questions. If you don't want to raise them here, please do feel free to email us with any questions and we will get back to you. I can't see that we actually have any questions. So yes, thank you very, very much for your, oh, we do have a question. That's a very interesting question. And I will come back to you afterwards on the answer to that question, just about the public sector implications of the standard. I will come back to you afterwards around that. So thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you for joining me.